Welcome to the PIO podcast, a place for all things public information related for police, fire, EMS, and local government. An open forum to learn, grow, and develop your public information skills. Your host, Robert Tornabene, is a public information officer with over 10 years in the field and 27 years of law enforcement background. In each episode, we will explore different aspects of the public information officer profession. Weekly, we will delve into the field of public information by talking to other PIOs. So sit back and enjoy this episode.
Good afternoon. Today on the PIO podcast, we have episode 33. We have Emily Ellen Lucht. She's a communication director for the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Emily, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you on. Discussion that we had that really sparked the whole interest in getting you in the interview was because we're going to talk about accessibility. I don't know if a lot of PIOs consider it sometimes, and they consider it in the broad context that it is. So we're going to talk about it today as we go through our discussion and through the podcast. But I'd like to hear a little bit about how long you've been in the position, what your background is. So if you can go on about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background's actually kind of a little different than most PIOs. So currently I'm working for the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, like you mentioned, and I've been in that position since about May. So still relatively new to the position and absorbing as much as I can. I have an incredible team that's helping me, thank goodness. Prior to that, I worked for the Maryland Center for School Safety as their communication specialist. And I really got to help kids find ways to stay safe by starting, a student focus group, working with all of our awesome police officers in the schools, outside of the schools, telling their story. And I was kind of the social media maven, digital person of all things. And then prior to that, I was with the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. I was there for about 3 years as their digital engagement coordinator. So again, all things social media related, but that's when I really started to understand the role of a PIO, what it is that they do, what it is that they don't do. Because I think there's a lot of, what's the word I want to say? A lot of discrepancies as to what a PIO does and doesn't do. But we all know they all wear many, many hats.
And it depends on the size of the organization, the number of people that they have in their department or in their unit. Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
So broad.
Yeah. And so the crazy part is I'm not actually from Maryland, as much as I would love to tout the state that I'm in. I'm actually from the Midwest, similar to you. I was born and raised in Platteville, Wisconsin. And so prior to me being in Maryland, I was actually working for the Platteville City Hall, so the city of Platteville. Okay. And what got me into the PIO position was I was actually temporarily taking a job as my husband was transitioning to his job over here. And they were just like, hey, we need somebody to do communications. The person who's in charge is pregnant and having twins. Can you help us out? And so I did. And then my very first day on the job, we had 2 tornadoes that came through my hometown, which hasn't happened in like 40 years. So I was blessed by fire very quickly.
That's usually what happens.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember getting a phone call at about 4:30 in the morning from our city manager. And he was like, we need somebody to go on social media. And we need somebody to talk to the media and tell people, like, don't go outside, don't go near any down power lines, don't do this, don't do that. And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, let me see if I can send those messages out to you. And little did I know, I was kind of being thrown into this role of being a public information officer because the city of Platteville is as small as it is. But when you find out, elected officials like the governor are coming to town, somebody's got to coordinate all that stuff. And I just so happened to be that person. So I think that helped me get the jobs that I am able to have now. And it's crazy because I didn't even want to be a PIO when I was in college. I went to school to be a journalist, which I think a lot of PIOs actually were probably former journalists. And I worked for the WNBA and the NBA up in Minnesota. And I was doing all those social media content stuff for them, putting together videos. Video is really my passion and my background. And so when it came to things like accessibility, those things we didn't really hear of at the time, especially in social media world where we were just starting to venture out into making sure each agency even had a Facebook page or it was verified. And so yeah, my story's a little crazy, but that's my elevator speech I give people, and they're always just so taken back. They're like, "Wow, you went from here to here to here." Yep, that's me.
Yeah, well, that happens. I mean, what we do is, we kind of move around a lot. The PIOs do. If they're in the field for a long period of time, they go from one organization to another as time goes on. So yeah, that happens.
Absolutely.
Emily, you are a strong advocate for providing accessibility. So let's kind of talk about the importance of it, and then let's go into the meat and bones of things. So why did you get behind the accessibility part of it? Why are you such an advocate for it?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. So originally, like I said, I really wasn't into the whole accessibility of things. I was more about, how do I make this content look cool? How do I make this content, most engaging? How do I reach those viewers that are, within my age group? So what happened was my grandmother actually suffers from macular degeneration, where you start to lose your eyesight after a while. And it came to my attention just through conversation with her that, she also is a citizen back home in Wisconsin. And so I kind of sat and wondered, like, what are we doing for people like my grandmother who are having visual disabilities? And so, we tried to give her, some assistive technology, give her the bigger magnifying glass and take her to the best and advanced doctors. And we realized there really wasn't an answer to it, other than we as her family had to, explain to her who's in the picture, who's standing next to us. I still remember on my wedding day explaining to her what my dress looked like, because she was very much into gowns and fixing things and making, Halloween costumes for us and stuff like that.
Oh, you're going to love this. So my wife and I were watching Say Yes to the Dresses back on TV. So, and I'm going to get, I know the PIOs, the guy PIOs are going to kill me for this, but so there was a girl that had her sight and then been in a horrible car crash and she lost her vision. She's getting married and she is trying to pick out her wedding dress. She can't see it. So it's all about the feel and touch for her and the interaction that she had. And then, of course, what her mother and I think her best friend were kind of helping her give a visual based off of what she felt. So, I mean, that's what a tie-in there for me. So I know I'm gonna get reamed for that one from people.
Yeah. And so, after having kind of that interaction with my grandmother, I realized that there was a gap. And so, I reached out to our partners at the Maryland Department of Disabilities. And that's when I had the awesome opportunity to meet and talk with Miss Cecilia Warren. And so Cecilia is their director. And I had an opportunity to meet with her at MEMA in our Emergency Operations Center. And I got to meet her dog. And she has a seeing eye dog, which is fantastic. Gardenia was her name. And now she has Yale. And so, Gail comes along with us for our rides whenever we have conversations with Facebook or Twitter. Gail's right there next to us, helping us, get our message out there. And so Cecilia even said too that she had looked at some of our messaging and, it wasn't accessible to screen reader technology, which was very new to me. I was like, screen reader technology, tell me more. And ever since, talking with her and hearing her, explain how easy it was to fix some of the issues that I was having, I was like, I need to know more about this. You're my go-to person. And so I really relied on Cecilia to kind of help coach me and guide me through this. But then when it came time for me to reach out to her about social media specifically, there wasn't a whole lot there. It was a huge gap. And so between her and I, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we, bridge this gap until Facebook says, hey, we have alternative text, or until we can go to Facebook and say, hey, you're missing alternative text.
And pretty much now
so
all the platforms now have the ability to put alternative text into images and tweets and posts, and which is awesome.
Yes. And so that we feel is such a huge lift from the visual side of things, from the screen reader technology side of things. And so now we're trying to address this next gap, which is captioning and automatic captioning. Where there's gaps, what we as fellow government communicators can send to our fellow PIOs to say, hey, look, this is still a gap. Here's how you can go about fixing it, until we have those conversations with those big entities. I know Facebook's been trying really hard to, get captioning, even if it's just automatic captioning. They've been trying really hard to get their stuff in line. I know Twitter's been trying really hard too. And so it's just a matter of just having those conversations with those platforms and saying, hey, let's have a conversation here. Let's show you why this works or why this doesn't work. And for the most part, they've been pretty, responsive and wanting to listen to us, but there's a lot more of a heavier lift on their side when it comes to the coding and so on and so forth.
The technology is an issue, obviously. And
it is, absolutely.
And there is a value in it for them. So it's not like they're not going to make money off of it, because if they can reach out to a community that previously did not have that accessibility, they now have more bang for their buck when it comes to their platforms, because they have a bigger pool of people to interact with, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the one that really started kind of this revolution, so to speak, of accessibility was Twitter. When Twitter came out with alt text, it was something Facebook hadn't considered yet. It was something LinkedIn hadn't even started thinking about, I'm sure. And so what we started to notice is when one platform starts to do it and people start to tout about how awesome it is, then the other platforms are like, oh, well, we can do this too. And so they kind of create their own competition within one another. And so that's been kind of fun to just kind of sit back on the sidelines and just kind of watch and observe to see, okay, who's going to set the bar.
Right. Hey, Emily, you know what? We probably should go back a second and say, have you explained what is alt text? Because I'm sure there are some people that are not aware of it.
Sure. Yeah. So alternative text or alt text, commonly referred to as alt text in the world that we kind of work in, is when you have a picture, but for somebody who might be visually disabled, it actually explains what this picture is. So us as content creators, it's our job to make sure that we define what that picture
and it's not
like.
It's not just like saying, oh, that's a police officer with a group of kids. You need to be much more descriptive.
Yes, exactly. And so a lot of people always ask us too, well, what should I put in my alternative text? Like, this picture has so much going on and it needs to be brief so I don't lose our reader or I don't lose the person who's actually looking at this. And so we always say, start with the basics of who, what, when, where, why, and maybe how. And then include those things like, for example, let's say it is, a police officer with a group of kids. I would say something to the extent of a police officer outside talking to a group of 6 kids wearing backpacks at a school bus stop, right? So really giving the person who is visually disabled a really good representation of what this picture is so that they can also be a part of that.
And that alt text is not necessarily something that a normal reader is going to go ahead and look at anyways.
Right.
And that is one thing that when I've heard people, oh, if I put too much in alt text, it's going to take away from the other information that I'm putting out there. And that's not true.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. Now, I will say it's been interesting because when Twitter came out with their alt text, but Facebook had not, at the end of every post, I would put an image description and I put maybe 1 or 2 sentences letting people know what that context was. And it was a really great way for us to inform our community that, hey, we want to reach everyone. We want to make sure everybody gets this message. Everybody understands what this is a picture of. And we were getting messages from people saying, why are you telling me what the image looks like? I already know what the image looks like. And so when you got to have that awesome engagement within social media to say, hey, we understand that you know what this picture looks like, but unfortunately for people who are disabled, if we didn't provide this, they wouldn't be able to be a part of this conversation. And you would get so many applause. I'm like, but let's focus on the content of the post here. But that's what they wanted to talk about. So even if you're just, taking those steps to show we're doing everything we can to make sure we reach everybody that we are honored to serve, I think that goes a long way.
I agree. So how can, as a group, the PIOs or social media managers, how can they improve the accessibility for overall? I mean, whether it's going to the requesting it from the platforms, especially with the closed captioning and also with the scrolling text, because that's another possible way that it can be done without closed captioning if it doesn't work.
Sure. So one of the things I tell people when, I give a presentation, or I even just, kind of ping them and say, hey, this isn't accessible. They always say, well, where do we begin then, Emily? You're coming at us with all of these swords drawn, so to speak, and we don't know which one to tackle. And so the answer that I always provide is start now. So if accessibility is new to you, and this is the very first time you're hearing somebody even use the word alt text, make it your mission, especially since just yesterday we were able to celebrate 31 years since the American with Disabilities Act was signed. And so on my Twitter, I was like, what are you going to do 31 years later to ensure that your message reaches everyone? So let's go ahead and have this little conversation about starting now. And so every picture that you post, provide 1 to 2 sentences of alternative text, right? The biggest part that I think people feel kind of intimidated by is, while yes, I do say this isn't accessible. When you start small and you start right away, you're already doing more than probably 50% of everybody else who isn't doing it, right? So it's a big chunk to kind of bite off and swallow, especially from the legal side of things. But if you're doing everything you can to ensure that, hey, in 2021, starting in, the summer, we're going to make sure every single one of our posts are accessible. We're going to make sure that we are descriptive in our alternative text, or maybe you're already focusing on alternative text. Maybe you want to work on captions. Okay. Now start to, schedule time to either tweak your captions, because I know a lot of people like to just simply upload their video to YouTube, let YouTube auto caption it, and then they upload it that way. Maybe enhancing your captions and, putting who is speaking, either, your narrator, boy, girl, whatever, and really just taking those small little steps to making it even more accessible. And eventually, in a perfect world, you'll be able to create content that is accessible. You'll be able to create content that is going to reach your entire audience.
All right. So what factors should PIOs consider when setting up messaging to the whole community, which include people with or without disabilities?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's hard to nail it down, because I don't want to focus so much just on social media accessibility, but just in
overall.
general.
No, overall. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I always remind all of our TV reporters before we have press conferences is, if there is a sign language interpreter there, put them in the shot. I know that the governor looks great on camera as a single image, but you are not helping anyone by simply focusing just on them. And while I understand that there is closed captioning available, not everybody wants to turn that on because it blocks the entire image overall. So something as simple as, talking to those reporters to say, hey, just as a reminder, we do have a sign language interpreter here. Make sure you include them in the shot.
I do have to agree with you that has gotten better since the pandemic. I think just because there were so many press conferences and it was becoming such an issue that the PIOs that were setting up the interviews were reminding the reporters, and then all of a sudden they're all there. And the governor, the mayors of major cities all had sign language people, and they never had that before. You never saw it.
Right. Yeah, it was very interesting to see how the pandemic shifted how we communicate digitally. And so you're absolutely right. I kind of saw it kind of across the board. It was really nice. And I still remember having friends, in the Midwest or, in the Northeast or in the Northwest sending me images of like their local newscast and being like, look at what they did. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Keep it up. Right. Because us, even if it's a small win, it's still a win.
Right.
And so when it comes to, even if it's, hey, we need to schedule a time to meet with our content creators, or we need to meet with leadership and we need to talk about accessibility things, or even just letting them know that accessibility is, and I hate to always pull the legal card in this, but sometimes that's what you kind of need to get people to focus on accessibility, which is, legally, if you're getting funding from the government, you are getting funding from, everyone, which includes people with and without disabilities. So you need to make sure, they're included. So even, city council meetings, I don't know how many different people reached out saying, their city council meeting, they couldn't figure out closed captioning. They couldn't figure out what they were, and so then I say, okay, let's go back to the budget. There are services that can help with the closed captioning of certain things. Make sure that they're being included in the budget from year to year, not just this one single council meeting. So small little things like that really will help PIOs as a whole. And, the list goes on and on of all the different things that people can do. But even if you're just standing and looking at your single press conference and making sure that people have, access to where the location is even going to be. I know as a former journalist, one of the biggest issues I had from just getting to wherever the press is supposed to be was, okay, you're going to walk through this building and you're going to jump over this. And, making sure that, those types of emergency information is not just accessible to people with and without disabilities, but is also accessible to the people who are going to be really broadening your reach.
Right. I agree. So Emily, how can, let's take like a simple thing like um, a media release, it's a big document, a lot of writing in it. What we're seeing a lot is we're seeing police departments, city governments, they take a photo of the media release and they post it on their social media pages, and then that's it. What can we do to improve that accessibility? Because obviously it's an image, so you can do all text, but again, now you're kind of, how much you're going to type into that all text to make it readable for the person that needs that accessibility issue. So let's go. We're talking about media releases. So what, when you, most of the agencies now, they're take a picture of their media release, they post it on their social media page, and how, as a PIO, are you going to take that information that's in the image and put it into alt text that's going to make it accessible for someone that needs that accessibility because of a disability?
Yeah, so I know exactly what you're referring to, and it drives me nuts. And I do have, eyes out there. People send me pictures all the time of like what their mayor is doing or what their local official is doing. And they're like, why are they doing this? I don't understand. What can they do? So the first thing I would say is, one, don't do that. I know that they are relying on that image to be something that hopefully people are going to read. But quite honestly, people who even aren't disabled visually aren't reading it.
Right.
I hate to break it to you. What we've generally done is we will post, whatever the quote may be, as the content, and then we will add a URL. And we know that our website is accessible, and we don't upload it as a PDF. We actually use WordPress, and actually the state of Maryland uses WordPress. So that way screen reader technology is able to read it. The other thing that we do too is a lot of people, when they are doing their press releases, have the longest URL known to mankind. And so, having the ability to create custom link shorteners really helps, because I'll be honest, even as a person who isn't disabled, I don't want to hear my screen reader telling me, for more information, visit www.maryland.gov/ and reading it out forever. And it's just
Oh
like,
my
okay,
God.
we get it.
I never thought of that from a screen reader point of view, because especially with the long ones, I have a
I
hard enough
know.
time typing it in myself, let alone having to hear it to figure out to type it in. Oh my goodness.
Right, exactly. And so, I will say, Facebook and Twitter have done a pretty darn good job of creating those smaller URLs that are custom just to Facebook or custom to just to Twitter. But when it comes to me actually like typing it out, I always just in the back of my head say, okay, but let's say Twitter doesn't do this for me properly, or Facebook doesn't do this for me properly, because we all know there have been glitches with all the different social media platforms. And so I always just kind of use that as my backup to make sure that it does say, newsreleases.maryland.gov or something like that.
So you're using a URL shortener and you're paying for the service to have a custom URL. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think that helps, not having to hear everything read out. Now I will say, Cecilia helped me figure out how I can use screen reader technology on my phone and how to use screen reader technology on my computer. And while I know for some people the same monotone voice is kind of annoying, it's the best way to test your social media messages. It's the best way to test your website, is to actually use the screen reader technology that your end user is using and see what changes can be made just by listening to how that screen reader is reading it out to you.
Great. So, Emily, what frustrations with digital accessibility would you like to see improve?
Oh, well, let me go get my list. It's a long one. But I think the biggest one is every single time Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or, Snapchat, all of them, right? Anytime they make any type of visual improvement or some type of an update, inevitably accessibility always gets left behind, no matter what. We just saw a couple of days ago, Twitter just released a statement about how you can do, voice tweets. And, the accessibility community was like, why would you do just voice tweets and not captions? And they immediately took it down and said, okay, you know what? You're right. We got to fix this. And it was their opportunity to address those issues. But not all platforms are willing to have those conversations. They have to worry about, the third party or the private parties spending all their money on advertising, and they would, want to focus on the financing side of things, right? Because money makes the world go around.
Right.
But not just the fact that it's being updated and accessibility isn't being added to it, but also that the way that I post content on Twitter is not the same as the way I would post is not the same way I post content on Facebook. Right. And so Facebook is ahead of the game for this one, but Twitter's ahead of the game for this one. And it's hard to kind of keep up, not just with the updates, but with what is accessible, what's not accessible. When stories first came out for Facebook, the first thing I said was, well, we're not using it. It's not accessible. And they're like, what? No. You can make it accessible. I said, no, there's really not a whole lot I can do. Same issue that we had with Snapchat. And so we pulled off Snapchat and said, we're not going to use it. We understand that the younger generation is there, but we have a duty to uphold to make sure that we are always ensuring that our content is accessible. So when Twitter came out with their fleets and they said that, hey, we at least have alt text, I was super excited. But now Twitter took down fleets. So it's hard to keep up. And it's so frustrating to know that all of these things are changing and you can just guess, I wonder if this is accessible. Probably not. all right, well, let me start writing my messages and my emails and sending out my tweets to let people know, like, hey, just as a heads up, this might not work for you the way it used to work for you.
Right. Absolutely. Emily, that's awesome that, this whole issue opened up my eyes to a lot of stuff. And I guarantee when this airs, people are going to be sending you messages left and right because this is something I'm sure that many PIOs think about, but they're not necessarily, you know, they're afraid to tackle it because they think it's too much. And, I'm sure that it's gonna sprout a lot of discussion. I know the National Information Officers Association has their conference coming up. I think it's this week. I think it's going on this week. It starts today. I think Wednesday. Yeah, I think so. Or no, it starts Sunday. Anyway, so it's really going to create a lot of attention, and
Mm-hmm.
I wish I was going to the conference and I could bring this to the conference and have a discussion with them. But maybe this will be something for a future discussion that the NIOA and like even the social media government group or the EGLG, ELGL discuss, because I think this is something as government organizations we obviously have to do, and that's important. All right, so let's lighten this up a little bit. Let's talk about some rapid fire stuff here. Rapid fire questions.
Let's do it. Yes,
All right.
I'm excited. What do you got for me?
Favorite go-to libation?
Oh, okay. So I actually just went to after living here for 3 years, I finally went to my very first winery and brewery. And so there is a place out in Western Maryland called Red Shedman Brewery. And I had their blueberry cider, and I didn't expect to leave with 8 cans of it, but here we are.
Oh, so I thought you were going to say 8 cases.
No, they probably wouldn't let me take all of them. That is my new go-to.
It sounds really refreshing, though.
Perfect for the summer.
Oh, absolutely. What is your most recent book that you're reading or have read?
Oh, okay. So one of the things that I don't get to talk about a whole lot in my career is mental health. So I have a friend of mine, her name is Jess Brown. She works for the Iowa DNR, and she sent me this book over Christmas, and it's called, I'm going to forget the title of it now, but it's like the Very Busy Woman's Guide to Self-Help and Mental Health. So I just cracked that book open, and now I'm really starting to figure out how to not just live physically healthy, but also mentally healthy as well, which is something that I think a lot of social media and public information officers kind of put on the back burner. And it's also a topic they don't want to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, definitely reach out to Jessie because she's awesome. She could definitely help you out.
Is that the Extremely Busy Woman's Guide to Self-Care?
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. All right. Yeah. See, I'll Google anything. So always good. I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So who has been the most influential person in your career?
Oh, okay. So my grandma, for one, right? She kind of brought my eyes to this, and also Cecilia Warren from the Department of Disabilities, who brought this to me. But it's a tie between both my husband, Adam, and my father, Dan. So my dad lives in Wisconsin, and he's always constantly encouraging me to work harder. That's just that Midwestern mindset he has is, you got to work hard if you want to go far. But also my husband's been doing a fantastic job of always kind of mentally checking in with me, making sure, is everything okay? What more do you need? When things aren't going right for me, or I'm so, frustrated and only seeing things with my blinders on, he does a really good job of, opening my mind to other possibilities. And so I think I've been able to grow with these two awesome individuals. And also, my mom's been very influential as well. She's always been my cheerleader on the sidelines, but definitely my dad and my husband. So I guess I found the perfect husband because he's a lot like my dad.
There you go. Yep. We don't always mirror your fathers, but in your case,
yes.
Okay. All right. So anything you'd like to add before we finish up today?
Yeah. So I think the biggest piece is, what is the takeaway here for people? The biggest thing I would say is start now. I know a lot of people are just very nervous. They don't even know where to begin. The idea of accessibility is really overwhelming. But if you start to include accessibility in your process for content creation, accessibility in your process for media releases, it gets easier and easier and easier, right? It's kind of like when you're trying to learn to ride a bike without training wheels. You have to start small and you have to grow, but you can leave those training wheels on for as long as you need to, but you're not going to grow. You're not going to be able to progress. So start now, take off the training wheels. Just, there's going to be a couple of times where it's going to go really well. And then there's going to be a couple of times where it's not going to go as well as you want. But, reach out to those who are on social media, who get it. There's a lot of really awesome organizations and government organizations who've been doing it really, really well. Make sure to follow those people. Let those guys kind of be your guide. Let them be, your social media mentors or your press release mentors, website mentors, whatever the case may be. But follow the people who are doing it right. And there's a phrase that always is, if somebody's copying you, then you're doing it the right way.
That is true. What is it? Plagiarism is the highest form of flattery.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, and if you want to follow the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, go for it. We're still trying to, with me being new in this role, I stepped into this role and I told my supervisor, I'm going to tell you, everything has to change from an accessibility standpoint. We have to reformat our press releases. We have to do this. And she said, yep, that's why I hired you.
There you go. That's
so we're
excellent.
Still trying to figure it out, but we'll get there.
Awesome. So Emily, how can people best reach out to you if they want to learn more about you or connect possibly for help with their own accessibility issues?
Yeah.
And I'll put it in the show notes. So, if it's an email, Twitter, LinkedIn, however you'd like to do it.
Sure. So my email is just emily.lucht, so EMILY.lucht, LUCHT Maryland is all written out, .gov. I'm pretty active on Twitter when it comes to accessibility. And you can reach me by typing in allen.emilym. And you will see a whole list of all of the things regarding accessibility. I think I just tweeted out about the Olympics just a couple of days ago too. So I'm keeping my eyes on all things related to accessibility as best as I can.
Outstanding. Emily, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about such an important topic for PIOs. So thank you very much again for coming on. And listeners, if you haven't had a chance to talk to Emily, here's your opportunity. Reach out for her. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much.
And that was Emily Allen Lucht from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Thank you for coming on the show. You had a great topic, and I hope everybody maybe reevaluates what they're doing on their current platforms and improves accessibility for all. Until next time, everyone, be safe.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to contact the show, please email us at thepiopodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.